1994. Who you worship, nervous on your knees. When you say your prayer, pray for Lee's. Who you worship, nervous on your knees. When you say a prayer,
pray for Lee's.
What's up? What it do? Free to Real. Today, we're diving into the story of my homie, Bennie Lee Lawson. A name you might not know, but definitely should. From the streets of Washington, D.C., Kennedy Street, Northwest to be exact. Bennie's life was one that reflected the harsh realities of growing up in Washington, D.C. during some of the city's most turbulent times. This is just another street tale. This isn't just another street tale. This is a story of pain, power, and protest. Let's take it back to the 90s, when D.C. was on fire. The murder rate in the city was through the roof, peaking at nearly 500 homicides in 1991. The streets were flooded with drugs, and the violence was tearing apart communities. D.C. was known as the murder capital of the nation, and for every young brother in the streets, it was a daily struggle just to survive. I was in the streets at the time. I remember the times very well. In this environment, Bennie was like so many others, caught between the pull of the streets and the need to find a way out. But Bennie wasn't just another statistic. He was smart. He was a thinker. Someone who knew that there had to be more to life than what the streets had to offer. But like so many of us, he found himself boxed in with limited options and a world that seemed stacked against him. And this is where the story takes its turn. On November 22nd, 1994, Bennie made a decision that would forever change his life and the lives of many others. Armed with a fully automatic Mac 11, Bennie entered the police headquarters in downtown D.C., less than a mile from the White House. Calmly, with the Mac 11 tucked in his pants, Bennie entered the elevator with 5 law enforcement officials. He spoke, acted as if nothing was wrong. He then exited the elevator, looking for William Hennessy, the commander of the homicide squad. Hennessy wasn't at work, so Bennie ended up in a cold case office on the 3rd floor, which was occupied by FBI agents and DC homicide detectives. Bennie had been here before on the 3rd floor just days prior and felt as if Hennessy and the detectives had disrespected him. They lied to him and told him that his DNA put him at the scene of a triple slaying that they were investigating. However, no DNA had come back at the time. They also told him that if he did not cooperate, they would put the word on the streets that he was a rat. To top it off, they stated that they had information from an informant that Bennie had been sexually assaulted in prison, and they were going to tell everyone that he had been raped. Many people don't know that part, which was never true. Y'all got a problem with me? Bennie shouted as he pulled the Mac 11 once he stepped inside the cold case office. He opened fire right into the face of an FBI agent. The bloodbath began. It was a tragic and desperate act. He would end up killing 2 FBI agents and a DC homicide detective. He would end up killing 2 FBI agents and a DC homicide detective before killing himself with a ricochet bullet from a Glock that had been taken from an FBI agent during a shootout. The city was shocked. But for those who knew Bennie, this was not just a senseless act of violence. But for those who knew Bennie, this wasn't just a senseless act of violence. It was the result of years of systematic oppression, frustration, and hopelessness. He held a grudge against the system and felt like he should have never been sent to prison on the first charge, according to the lawyer on the case. Now, let's pause for a minute and draw a parallel to another brother from a different time, Jonathan Jackson, a brother Bennie admired and read about while he was in prison. Back in 1970, Jonathan, the younger brother of George Jackson, the famous Black Panther, took over the Marin County Courthouse in California, trying to free his brother and other inmates. Jonathan Jackson was only 17 at the time, but like Bennie, he was driven by a sense of injustice and a desire to fight back against a system that seemed designed to crush him. Jonathan's acts was one of protest, an explosive reaction to the racial injustice of his time. After all, the state of California was trying to put his brother to death in the gas chamber. Bennie's actions, though different in many ways, shared that same core, an eruption of anger, frustration, and a sense of powerlessness. Both men felt cornered by a system that offered no way out, and both took drastic steps in an attempt to take control of their circumstances, even if only for a moment. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to glorify violence or justify what Bennie did, but it's important to understand where these actions come from. They're the byproducts of a society that too often forgets about its most vulnerable, its most desperate. When you leave people with nothing, no options, when you strip them of hope, sometimes they strike back. And the only way they know how, Bennie struck back with a Mac 11. Bennie Lee Lawson wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a villain either. He was a product of his environment, shaped by the harsh realities of life on Kennedy Street in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, a city that was plagued by violence and despair. His story, like Jonathan Jackson, is a reminder of the deep pain that exists in our communities and the lengths to which some will go when they feel they have no other options. As we reflect on Bennie Lee's life and the choices that he made, let's also think about what we can do to make sure that the next generation doesn't feel like they're trapped in the same cycle. As we reflect on Bennie's life and the choices he made, let's also think about what we can do to make sure that the next generation doesn't feel like they're trapped in the same cycle. We owe it to them to create a world where they can thrive, not just survive. Rest in peace, Bennie. Your story isn't forgotten. Leads up. Free to
1994. Who you worship, nervous on your knees. When you say your prayer, pray for Lee's. Who you worship, nervous on your knees. When you say a prayer,
Pray for Lee's.